Up until 100 years ago, not all women in the United States were allowed to vote.
The Constitution was not written for women. And, we hear that women got the right to vote. Well, by the way, nobody ever just gets anything from somebody who's in a position of power. You have to fight for that, and a lot of women fought very, very hard for that right.
The 19th Amendment passed in 1920. Today, women's issues remain central to American policy and politics.
Well, Georgia has passed one of the most restrictive abortion policies in the country.
When it comes to paid parental leave, our country's policies are some of the worst in the world.
I want to focus on a milestone for gender equality that we haven't actually achieved yet, the Equal Rights Amendment.
Issues of women's reproductive rights, pay equity, and family leave policies are important, so why did it take so long for women to have a voice in America's democracy? Here's what you need to know about women's suffrage. The U.S. Constitution was written in 1787. The nation's founding document didn't give many specifics on who could and could not vote, so the rules were largely left to the states, and most restricted the right to vote to white, land-owning men over the age of 21, who made up as little as 6% of the population.
Men thought women should be governed by their husbands, that their husbands represented their interest at the ballot box.
The framers of the Constitution and many of those that set the laws thereafter, in essence, considered women to be childlike, incapable of independent thought, and therefore not worthy of making the tough decision of which white man was elected to office. Fast forward to the early 1800s, and women began speaking up about how inequitable restricting the right to vote was. In 1848, a few Quaker women, outspoken in the movement to abolish slavery and involved in various movements, met up for tea and bonded over the trials and tribulations of being a woman in 19th century America. Months later, two of those early suffragettes, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, organized the first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls, New York, and hundreds of people showed up. There, they created the Declaration of Sentiments, based on the Declaration of Independence, which listed their agenda for improving women's rights, including protecting gender equality, the right to an education, and of course, the ability to vote. But it wasn't all agreement and tea time.
After the Civil War, it would be racism that would cause one of the biggest divisions in the movement.
The 15th Amendment, introduced in 1869, would give African American men the right to vote regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, though it said nothing of gender.
And Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, two of the most famous suffragists of the 19th century, famously oppose the amendment, say unspeakably racist things against it, clearly displaying a kind of elitist and racial hierarchy, whereas Lucy Stone organizes a rival organization to support black men's voting and fight for women's vote, called the American Women's Suffrage Association. And a lot of those women of color just said, this white women's organizing doesn't speak to our needs, and we're going to go organize on our own.
Still, the movement continued, and in the next 40 to 50 years, some suffragettes pushed their agenda by attempting to vote and then filing lawsuits when they were denied the right. In 1872, Susan B. Anthony voted in the presidential election, was later arrested, tried, and fined $100. She refused to pay the fine. Other women also ran for local and national office on campaigns pushing for equality, a subtle nod to the irony of a woman being able to run for office but not vote. By 1878, a formal amendment for women's suffrage made it to the U.S. Senate, but with little momentum. The divided women's groups realized they needed to join forces and unite as one by 1890. In the years leading up to the 19th Amendment, the movement for suffrage heated up, with marches, protests at the White House, and a prison hunger strike after longtime suffragette Alice Paul was arrested and tortured for demanding the right to vote. The early 1900s also marked the beginnings of early suffragettes wearing all white as a symbol of women's suffrage, as well as purple and yellow, which stood for loyalty, purity, and hope.
In the 1910s, a bunch of states, particularly all the Western states, strike the word male from their voter clauses in their constitutions so that women begin voting in massive numbers all across the American West. And that leads people to realize that voting is not going to be the huge cataclysmic disaster that a lot of people think.
One of the biggest turning points for the women's suffrage movement was World War I. An estimated 9 million American women joined the war effort, some on the front lines and others working as ambulance drivers, medical suppliers, and more.
Woodrow Wilson eventually comes around to supporting women's suffrage, partly because of the war service that women offered, the way that he got embarrassed constantly by Alice Paul and the militants.
Then all that was left was Congress's approval, which didn't come easily. The 19th Amendment passed in the House in 1918 and Senate in 1919. A year later, the necessary 36 states had ratified the amendment, and women were granted the right to vote by law. and so began politicians' attempts to appeal to women for their votes. In 1923, Alice Paul authored the Equal Rights Amendment, an amendment that's still awaiting ratification today.
We think of 1920 as the end of the suffrage movement, but that's because we let white women define our vision of activism. But a voting fight continues well after 1920 by women of color who will organize alongside black men.
And it would take until the 1960s, a full 45 years after the 19th Amendment, for many black women to be able to secure their real right to vote in this country.
Since then, the American public has elected a wave of women to public office, heard women boldly advocate for pay equity, and participate in a worldwide rebuke of sexual misconduct through the Me Too and Time's Up movements.
For too long, women have not been heard or believed if they dared to speak their truth to the power of those men. But their time is up.
Women want to be equal, and we want it in the Constitution.
We're underrepresented in everything from state legislatures to foreign governments to corporate boards. We can't just look back and say, we have the right to vote, we're good. No, there's so much work still to be done.
As we look back at women's suffrage, we remember it is a movement of diverse origins and many mothers. And voting isn't something we should take for granted.
And if we had a federal law that said that people had a right to vote, then the states wouldn't be able to interfere with that voting right as robustly as they are right now.
Stating the most obvious, vote. Vote, vote, vote. Vote like your life depends on it, because it probably does.